Hi, welcome to another video around our Bowl-bound College Football League, WWCF. Of course, Bowl-bound is a Grey Dog software league. I believe the last recap video I did was right before the conference championships, and we hadn't figured out who had won the awards and who was going to the playoffs. If you're interested in a bowl-bound college football league, this is a great league to join. There are a lot of active users. And they contribute quite a few stories, as well as it's a very, very competitive league. It was much more competitive this year than it has been in the past. Again, we merged our two bowl-bound college football leagues over the summer. I'm sorry, over the fall, and combined them into one. And we've been playing that season out since then. And I would say that this is probably one of the most competitive seasons I've seen in a long time. So if you're interested, I'll put the links in the video. Definitely let us know. We'd love to have you in the league. I do have torn feelings around the game itself. I know that they are working on an update to it finally. So the game was released in like 2016. I think the last update was probably like 2019. So kind of a difference between like Wolverine Studios, Draft Day Sports, college football, and we do a lot of videos on that too. And Ball Bound is every year Brooks and them at Wolverine Studios is releasing a new title. They're updating it, they're keeping it fresh, whereas Ball Bound is essentially been the same game since largely 2016. The last update kind of allowed you to do a little bit more, but they haven't updated the plays and other things. It's still a really good game, though. I will say that even though it's now entering kind of its teenage years, it's still worth it. I do look forward to them updating it, and I hope that they add new game plans, they add new formations, they add some other quality of life adjustments, not just new teams and new leagues. But I definitely would still recommend this game if you are into the text-based simulations. There's some things I like about this game more than I like about Draft Day, and there's some things I like about that one than I like about this one. But anyways, I digress. So conference championships have taken place, and the first round of the playoffs has taken place. So we're going to dive right into that right now. So in the ACC, the big battle, of course, was Louisville versus Maryland. So this is Rob versus my team. I would just a shout out to I think just a shout out to Rob in general is I think he had like 4 or 5 teams in the playoffs this year. He had a lot of teams in the conference championships. He just had a really good year this year. Now, of course, Louisville is a GDCFL team that moved over from that league into this league. So it was a lot stronger than the Louisville squad that was in the WWCF originally. So he got past people like Harry, uh, which is no small feat, Cardle, in Blue Roos, and that's saying a lot. Those are really quality coaches. The Coastal was a little bit stacked, whereas the Atlantic really had me and Mike Card in it, which that went down to the wire with him at Wake Forest. So Maryland won this. Maryland's having an up and down season, mostly due to suspensions and injuries. I mean, they've been without their starting quarterback most of the season. And then on top of it, just injuries on the line, injuries in the secondary, injuries at running back. The only reason why they're doing well is their wide receiver core didn't get injured. And Maryland, of course, is a pass attack. But Maryland won it. Both teams, if I remember correctly, made it into the playoffs. So there was no loss there for Rob. The next game is SparCon at Cincinnati versus Miro at Rutgers. Miro, of course, is one of the most dominant coaches in the game. SparCon is a really quality coach. So this one went really down to the wire before Rutgers won it. Rutgers is Maryland and Rutgers are like the beast of the East. But great job with SparCon. He did take over Cincinnati. He was at Georgia Tech, I believe, before this, and then moved to allow Blue Roos to take Georgia Tech. And he's done a great job with Cincinnati, who is one of the stronger teams in the league. He just couldn't get past Merrill with Rutgers. Kevin won the Big Ten with Notre Dame. Notre Dame is one of the GDCFL teams that moved over. They got past the CPU team of Michigan. If you're a Michigan fan and you like this genre, that's a great team to take over. They're still really, really good. Squires is a phenomenal quarterback, but Kevin, you can't say enough about him. This is a GDCFL team, but Kevin is probably one of the strongest coaches in the league, right up there with Merrill. Um, and then the next one was Rich Troxel at Kansas State versus Merrill at Texas Tech. Texas Tech is probably the one of the most dominant teams in the league right now. So no shock that they got past Rich, but Rich put up a really good game against them. I will say that in general, Rich had to run a gauntlet to get to this game, which was by no means a easy one because he had to get past Beats. Beats being a really, really good coach, and had to get past David Jones, who is another really good coach. Whereas Miro had to, of course, get past Mike Cart and Mike Smigro, the Mikes, in order to get there. So great season for Miro, really good season for Rich. Kansas State's a GDCFL team that moved over. I don't believe they had that level of success in GDCFL, so he definitely, in a more competitive league, translated that into a really solid season. The next game is Illinois is Mike Schmigo versus Harry at Ball State. They duke it out every year pretty much for this. This year I think it went to Ball State. Yeah, it did. Uh, I think Illinois, if I remember correctly, actually made it into the playoffs. So did Ball State. And Illinois' loss actually probably helped some, probably hurt some teams that were trying to get at-large bids from not getting them. Again, one of the big things about conference championships is because we have a 10 and 6 rule for the playoffs, the 10 conference champions and then the 6 at-large bids. If a highly ranked conference uh, champion loses or division champion loses in the conference championship to maybe an unranked team, it can really unsettle the whole playoff field. And I think we saw that actually play out. And it happens most seasons. Because what you want to see is like if Maryland's ranked higher than Louisville or Louisville's ranked higher than Maryland, you don't want to see one of those two teams lose because it means that another one's going to grab that's probably a bad example, but if you have one that's ranked and one that's not, and then the ranked one loses and they're high up enough, they're going to bump someone out of the at-large field because the other team's going to go. Excuse me. Um, Western Kentucky, Connecticut, these are two CPU teams. Connecticut just had a really good season. Not sure why Western Kentucky only had 11 games. I'm gonna have to look into that for next season. But so great season for UConn. If you want to come in and take a team in the MAC, UConn is definitely a good one. So is Western Kentucky. Uh, UTEP versus Wyoming. Wyoming is another Rob team. They've had a phenomenal season. If you think about Wyoming, they had to get past both me and Merrill at Idaho and me at Washington State, and he did that. So just a phenomenal season. And this is not a GDCFL team. This is actually a WWCF team. So just a great season for him, making it into the playoffs. And an 11-2 season is always something to be happy with. The next one was again another Kevin team. Arizona has been a long dominant powerhouse in the GDCFL. Stanford is rich. Again, he got two teams in the conference championships. That's really phenomenal. And this game was pretty close. Kevin ultimately won it, who's the team I would have thought would win it. I just didn't expect it to be this close. So just hats off to Rich with a great season. And I do believe Stanford made it into the playoffs. Both of these are GDCFL teams. So the reason why I bring that up is GDCFL moved with its roster. The teams from GDCFL moved with the rosters. So if they were a dominant team in GDCFL, they'd be a dominant team in WWCF. And that was just to make it more equitable when it came to the merger. So rounding it out is Mississippi State beat Florida. This one's not too much of a shock, given how good Mississippi State is in GDCFL. The score is a little bit of a shock. Harry doesn't normally lose like that with Florida. But Mississippi State just had a phenomenal year. They were a dominant team in the GDCFL. I think that they're actually the defending national championship in the G. No, they're maybe a few years removed. But Mississippi State is already always up there in GDCFL. So it's good to see Mike come over with that team and be able to dominate. And then the last one is the Sun Belt. This is Montana is yet another one of Rob's teams, and really no doubt though, Montana is a lot stronger than the rest of the Sun Belt. It is a GDCFL team that moved over, and he translated that into success. Award winners, if we look at this real quick, the Heisman, don't read into that. I've got to put up the voting. But the CPU picked Daniel Mitchell, who's the Mississippi State quarterback. He had a phenomenal year. I don't know that I would disagree with this one, really. You could argue that one of the running backs should have gotten it, but like Forsyth out of Rutgers or someone like that. But he's had a solid year. Um, I always struggle maybe a little bit with some of these. I don't struggle with this one. I think Jeffrey Moore out of Texas had a phenomenal year. As you can see, he had 10 interceptions, 143 yards, one touchdown. Also had a sack, 13 pass defenses, and 95 tackles. That's just a solid player right there. For Davey O'Brien, you could argue which one should get it. I always don't like when I see the All American go to one person uh, and the Heisman go to another one. Then you see another person win the Davy O'Brien. I need to figure out why the picture is not there. But Beckham's had a great season for Texas Tech. You could argue that just the fact that Texas Tech played in the conference it was, that maybe he deserved it a little bit more. But Mississippi State plays in the SEC, and passing in the SEC is really hard. But both quarterbacks had a great year, so congrats to Miller for Beckham on the Davy O'Brien. Forsyth, I think he deserved this. He's had a really good year, almost 2,000 yards in 13 games. There were some other running backs maybe who had a little bit more, but just in general, his ability to dominate the rushing game was pretty evident throughout the season. If we look at the second team offense, you can kind of see really quick that there wasn't another one really close to him. The Blitnikoff, I don't have an issue with this. I could argue that the Maryland wide receiver should have gotten it, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day, or you could have given it to McClellan. But Shapiro definitely deserves it. Again, Rice is one of Mike Hart's multiple teams. They just have been a phenomenal team to watch, and as they grow, they won the WWCF last season. I don't think they are in a position to defend that title this year because I don't think they made the playoffs. But definitely Shapiro is worthy of the Bolitnikoff. Mackey, again, this is one of those no-brainers. You could argue all day long about who you think should be though. Stallworth, I think, was the best tight end in the whole league this year. 1,000 yards, over 1,000 yards, over 90 receptions for a tight end. That's really strong. And Texas Tech is a pretty balanced offense, so just a great year from him. I would argue that he could actually be in the Heisman running. Um, I always don't like this, but Cody Olson is someone I've talked about before. He definitely deserved the Lombardi. I'm not going to go too much into that. I don't think I can see. Yeah, 30. He had 18 run blocks, 38 pancakes, no sacks. You could argue that the kid from Akron or Alex Choice could have it, but the CPU sometimes just prioritize pancakes higher. I think if it wasn't going to be Olsen, it was going to be Choice. They both had really phenomenal years. Outland, of course, goes to the best defensive line person. This is another of Rob's teams at TCU. This one, you probably could argue that maybe there was a better person out there for this, um, like Matlock out of uh, Iowa State is someone who comes to mind almost immediately. There's another kid. I'm not going to bore you by going through all of the going into the stats. We'll look at that real quick. But there was another kid out there that had a lot more sacks. But again, it's a simulation game, so it's however the computer decided to prioritize it this year. The Buckus, this went to Phelps. I don't have an issue with this. His sack total is low, but I mean, he had a lot of tackles for losses, a lot of tackles just in general. Again, you can always make arguments that there may have been a different linebacker that you would prioritize higher, like Bush maybe is one, but I don't have an issue with this. This is one of those when I saw his stats, I was just like, yeah, it makes sense. Um, Thorpe makes sense completely. Not going to talk about more again. I think he definitely deserved it. Um, the Groza, this normally goes to the person who has the most points. It looks like it didn't really change, but I mean, when you look at Washington, he had a really good year. He only missed 5 field goals out of 41 attempts, was 5 of 6 from over 50. You can't really argue that one at all. Ray Guy, this is another one of those that's from Rob's team at TCU. Uh, I could probably argue this one a little bit. There was a better punter out there, but the CPU chose them, and we don't typically overturn these. We used to vote on all of them, but there wasn't a lot of participation. It took a lot of effort. I may go back to that next season as I get some time freed up, but definitely, I think the next guy for the Tetapu award uh, definitely deserved it. This one, hands down, is Baker. Baker had a phenomenal year. I mean, you just look at it. He was averaging 31.3 on kickoff returns with a touchdown and averaging 15.2 on punt returns with 6 touchdowns. That's phenomenal. I think that's actually a league record, to be honest. So just a great year for him. Definitely deserved it. When we talk about Coach of the Year, it, in my eyes, Miller's up there for Coach of the Year. And again, this is one of those where I've got to get it out there. But if we were to look at the different conferences, and this is normally how I look to see who should be the Coach of the Year candidates, is Miller definitely deserves at Texas Tech. I would say Rob is a candidate as well. Louisville overperformed in so many different ways. Um, I don't normally have two coaches from the same thing. Um, just looking here real quick. Mike Schmigo or Harry out of Conference USA both had really good seasons. And I know Rob's like, well, get to the point. Rob at Wyoming is another team that I think would be on the cusp of it. He's ranked 26th. For a Mountain West team, that's really good because most Mountain West teams are below 40 in prestige. But definitely he deserves it. Kevin would be right up there with Arizona. I think Kevin had a phenomenal season. Mike Hart would be another candidate with Mississippi State. And of course, yeah, I think that those would be the ones I would say are the real leaders. If we look at the player leaders real quick, passing wise, it makes sense. Mitchell was the leading passer. I think he was also the leader in. He wasn't, but he of the people who threw a lot, he was up there. So um, Beckham, of course, led in touchdowns. He led in yards. You could go either way. When we look at the rushers, Forsyth had the most yards in the season. He didn't lead in yards per game, but again, he led in probably the most meaningful one. You could argue Farrell could have been up there, but I think Forsyth is a no-brainer in my eyes. And then at wide receiver, of course, you had probably 3 or 4 good candidates for it. Um, I always get a little. I just again I think Shapiro was it. Flaherty could have had it, but the one guy I would have argued maybe could have been up there a little bit higher was McClellan out of Texas Tech, just because he had 13 touchdowns and he was averaging 90 yards per catch, uh, and just had a really good season. But I mean, both of them are mirrors, uh, or a mirror product, so you can't really lose. And then again, we talked about Choice. Choice is probably the only other person that could have been a viable candidate. And again, I just like Washington. Normally, I argue this one and I say that, wow, just choose the guy with the most points. I do think that Washington probably was the best kicker in the league this year. Maybe you could make a case with kid from USF. I don't think that there's anybody else who's really all that close. So just a phenomenal year. And I'm not going to show punting. Well, we'll show punters because I did say something about that. To me, the net needs to be over 38. It would have been Ogle or Maldonado for me. Um, it's just that one's just the CPU picking somebody. I do like Cartwright as well. There were multiple punters that probably deserve that a little bit more. There really isn't anybody who deserved the award over the kid from Rutgers. I mean, he had a phenomenal year. Definitely deserves it. Defense wise, we talked about the defensive line. I mentioned Matlick. I think he may have deserved it. Dyer is another guy who should have been up there. Um, but again, the CPU chooses a lot of different ways to judge that. On defensive turnovers, again, I do think that Frank's got a little bit of the shaft now that I think about it, but that's a hard one. I would say he plays in the Mountain West, whereas Moore plays in the Big 12, which is more competitive. So I would have went with Moore. So kind of jumping back to the playoffs. So we'll go to the bracket first. So, well, that's going to show it anyway. So the number one seed was Texas Tech. Of course, Connecticut won the conference and was the 16th seed. The number two seed was Mississippi State, and of course they got Montana. Uh, that's never a fun matchup. Rutgers was the number three seed. They pulled Wyoming. And then Arizona got the four seed. They pulled Ball State. Maryland was number five. They got Illinois. The sixth seed was Notre Dame. They got Louisville. The seventh seed was Texas. They got Michigan. And of course, the eighth and ninth seed was Stanford and TCU. As you can see, that there were some upsets, and we'll kind of go more into that because I think that that is something worth looking at. So we're going to go to week 18 because we skipped week 17. So no shock here. Miller just pounded Connecticut. That was an expected result. Again, Beckham and Stone are just this is probably going to be Miller's year if it's not Mike Hart's. Both of those teams are just really solid this year. And then, of course, Mike Hart downed one of Rob's teams pretty convincingly. And Montana's not a slouch team. But there is a big talent differential between the two. But again, Mitchell he played lights out. This one is a little bit of shock. You don't often see Miller lose in the first round, especially with Rutgers. But hats off to Rob. He came in and he upset Miller, who is one of the best in the game, and wow, that's a pretty big upset right there. No shock hill. This was one of those games where Harry was going to have to be spot on to even have a chance against Arizona. When the playoffs come around, Kevin's whole mentality shifts and he just gets really focused. He's one of the teams I think that could win it all. McCracken he's cracking. This is a really strong team to keep an eye on, and would be one of the four teams I could see winning it all. Um, Maryland got by Illinois. I'm a little shocked by this one, honestly, because I thought it would be closer. But Maryland finally is getting the quarterbacks back, which should help. Kim is just having a phenomenal season, but uh, Maryland will have a little bit harder time in the next round. But Illinois is a really, really good team. This one just kind of fell Maryland's way. Notre Dame versus Louisville. This is an upset. While Louisville is really, really good, so is Notre Dame. And Rob got a second team into the second round with Louisville winning this one. And Lopez has had a really good year throughout the season. And this is something to write home about. And of course, they came back in the fourth quarter to get past Notre Dame. Uh, so that's going to be an interesting story to watch. Louisville, of course, had a great season in the ACC and only really lost to Maryland. Um, was one of their two losses. So Texas versus Michigan. In the old days, this would have been John versus John, but it's Mike versus CPU. Uh, Mike took care of business really quick, and Texas is just having a good season as well. Only two losses. Um, and of course, Rivera is someone to keep an eye on. He's having a really good season as well. And then Rich kind of tripped up the bid for Rob to get more teams into the second round with Stanford. So Stanford's season continues. The Pac-12 will now have like two teams in there. So definitely great season from Rich. I'm kind of rooting for him because he's been a long time coach with GDCFL who hasn't maybe had the success uh, that he was warranted, but he's definitely doing a great job in the league this year. So really good job. And then I think that's all the main games for that. So if we look at the second round, you have Miro versus Rich. They played the other Texas Tech played the other Rich team in Kansas State. Now, it's a huge difference between those two teams. Stanford came over from the GDCFL. It is a powerhouse. So this should be a really, really good game. But again, when playoff time comes, Miro gets uber focused. And if I had to predict, I do think that Texas Tech wins this one. Arizona versus Maryland. This used to be like a mainstay back in the day in the GDCFL. Maryland hasn't had much success in the recent playoff, in recent times in the playoffs in WWCF. And I don't see them having success here. Arizona's lights out better than Maryland. Maryland has to get a quarterback before they will be able to start competing again. So I like Arizona in this one. Wyoming versus Louisville. This is Rob versus Rob. So he hasn't told me how he's going to play this yet, but he can only coach one team or put them both on CPU. I like Louisville in this one. I think Louisville will beat Wyoming. And then this is Mike Schmigo versus Mike Cart. So it's a battle of the mics. So Texas and Mississippi State. If it was anybody but Mississippi State, I would actually say Texas is the favorite. I just really think it's going to be hard for anybody to stop Mississippi State this year. If you look forward to the round, the next game could be Texas Tech versus Arizona. That is going to be a really fun game to watch. Miller versus Kevin. I've been dreaming about that day for a long time to see those two coaches actually go face to face. So definitely looking forward to that. This will probably be Louisville versus Mississippi State. So Rob versus um, Mike Cart. I like Mississippi State in that. And I think I can't guess the Arizona versus Texas Tech game. That one's too close to call. But I think Mike will be here, and then whoever Mike is facing, it's going to be a toss-up to see who wins it. So that's the quick recap. If you're interested in this league, there's a lot going on. We are nearing the off season, so I think by the time that we talk next, we will be at the championship game, or the championship game will have run, and we will have declared a champion, and we'll be moving into the off season with recruiting. So again, great time to get started. If you want to go out to WWCF's webpage or coaches page, they have a list of all the open teams. There's some really good ones out there still. if you're interested, and we'd love to have you join us. So thank you for your time this morning and have a great day.